My mother was Gloria Carpenter. She was born in Jamaica in 1922 as a Gloria Carpenter. She came to England to school and attended the Mary Datchler School in Camberwell, a grammar school, because teachers in Jamaica thought she got too many answers right. They thought she was cheating. So my grandfather, who had earned some money in Panama, building the canal, sent his daughters to be educated in England. During the war, she went to Canada in order to get her first degree in law, which she did at the University of Toronto. And then, almost exactly as the war finished, she sailed for England and came to Cambridge in order to do her LLB, which she did. Got a start first. She didn't tell us that. We had to find out for ourselves. And then was called to the bar at the Middle Temple. But then going back to Jamaica, no law firm would take her on. So she then had to forge another career. And then apart from being extramural tutor at the University of the West Indies and launching people like Derek Walcott and, that kind of artist, she served on the nursing council, she served on probation, she served on the library board, all of them as chair, changing the legislation. But I think the two main things that she did that I think she was most proud of, one of them was changing the Bastardy Act. We had the old Victorian Bastardy Act, which meant that men didn't have to acknowledge their illegitimate children. She changed it so they had to. It caused a lot of furor, but I thought it was one of the things she was most proud of. The second thing was setting up the family court, so that it was no longer an antagonistic process of getting support for your children, but there was a court in which there was a part for mediation, there was a part for rulings. And I think those two things were among the things she was most proud of. But she did masses of voluntary work in all sorts of areas. And I think to some extent used her legal talents. I mean, she drafted all kinds of legislation, but I think born 50 years later, she would have, probably have done rather more.
So it's been 70 years since the women in Cambridge first got their degrees, and the first black woman, Gloria Carpenter, she went to Girton, I go to Girton, she was the first black woman to get her degree as well. So Cambridge University African Caribbean Society, or ACS, we're all here today to celebrate that and to just focus on the legacy that these women have left to women like us, because 71 years ago, none of us would be here getting degrees.
I think she would have been absolutely delighted, to see that photograph of all these students who are now at Cambridge and are comfortably there and are owning their space there. I think she would have been tremendously proud, and that she was part of that legacy, I think, would also have made her, feel terribly proud of what she did. She told us a couple of stories about what life was like at Girton, particularly that her clothes were much fancier than the ones that people were wearing here, because of course things were rationed here. So a lot of her friends wanted to borrow her clothes, oddly enough. And then my grandmother in Jamaica was very enterprising. She always sent, a rum soaked Christmas cake, she sent salted eggs, she sent food, because she swore that my mother was starving. So whenever a package arrived for my mother, she again became very popular. The whole business of race, I think, was not difficult for her, because she was married to an Englishman eventually, but also she didn't want to acknowledge it as a major sort of handicap. But it was really clear with the relationships with my father's family, her husband's family, that it was difficult. And there was a separation between him and his family because he married a black woman. And there was a tutor of his that told her that if she married him, she would handicap his progress in life. So, there were these things that happened. On the other hand, she had a whole cohort of people who were either in London or at Cambridge, who were from the Caribbean or from Africa, who were politically very active and becoming lawyers and doctors and whatever else. And so they had their own clique to some extent that she operated within. When I arrived at Girton, and you're sort of 18 and bewildered and looking around, and somebody give me a box of apples, and the first assembly that we had in sort of the library, and the first time we put on our gowns, and the mistress comes in and she says, "I remember your mother," and I thought, oh my God, what have I walked into? I can't keep up with what she did. So Cambridge is always a part of our lives, but it was a quiet part of our lives in the Caribbean, because you remember it was, the socialist times, it was black power. So the idea that you were part of Cambridge also meant that you were, slightly, they wanted if you're imperialist. So what you did was kind of say, I'm really glad for the education, but my loyalties are here. There's some aspects of being at Cambridge I enjoyed very, very much, and I still have some friends from there. I did archaeology and anthropology that somebody once said to me was a slacker's option, which I don't believe. And I really enjoyed that as well. I mean, that idea of looking at cultures as sort of the ways that societies live in their environment is a really interesting and important one for me. There were some experiences that weren't nice, I have to say. A couple of racist things that happened that made me kind of think, okay, I need to be tough now. But what was lovely about it, for me particularly, is that there were so many bright minds around. there was so many different experiences. And you could find people who traveled from all over the world, you could find people who just come in from a village. You know, it was all kinds of varieties. And I think that gives you a kind of confidence in the world, at least a sort of intellectual confidence anyway. And that was probably why I just decided that I could be a playwright. Because I'd never done anything like that before, but I decided I could be, and I went off and did it. And wrote masses of radio drama and that kind of stuff. And I think it's that sense of being taught how to be curious, not being afraid of facts, sitting in the UL until you fall asleep over the text trying to figure out stratigraphy in a site or something. But that does give you a kind of confidence in your ability to learn. And I think, and to be curious about the world, and I think hopefully that's what's been reflected in my work. I decided that I wanted to write my mother's story because coming to live in England myself, I began to see how outstanding it was, certainly within this context. So I did a little bit of research, contacted lots of relatives, and tried to put the whole thing together initially as a radio serial, 5 episodes, and then a publisher approached me, Black Amber, and said, would you please make this into a book, which I did. And I think the most important thing for me was she died a couple of years before that, and so all of that was very, very fresh with me. And so what I wanted to do was put down both her and her relationship with my father, which was, throughout all the years, remarkable, absolutely remarkable. They spent more time talking than I think looking after us. Their marriage was one long conversation. Thank you very much to the Black Cultural Archives for allowing us to film here today.